People who make their living out of cleaning murder scenes, accidents, and the like. What is the worst thing you have experienced in your career?
I'm not a crime scene cleaner, but we used to transport coroner cases as part of our job. The elderly man who blew his head off with a shotgun in a third-story attic in the summer was rough. He'd been there a few weeks. We could smell him when we got out of the truck at the street. Blood spatter covered every inch of the walls in that room, as did the flies. Had to scrape some dried brain off the floor into a container for the coroner. When I went to roll him into a body bag, his bloated, slimy greenish-blue skin slipped off of him, and I was left holding a large sheet of it with both hands. The worst part was his wife had passed a few weeks before. They had been one of those married for 60 years, inseparable couples. He just couldn't take it. That broke my heart. Other guys were puking. I cried silently. I spent some time with the coroner to shadow for school. They were showing me different cases and going over them. Pictures included. The one that seemed to emotionally bother this particular guy the most was a scene where a father was coming home and pulling into the driveway. His daughter, 3 years old, was running to greet him, and he didn't see her and ended up running over her head. The pictures were heartbreaking enough. I can't imagine what the dad went through when he saw her like that. There was another one that had 3 bodies. Some guy killed his wife, his affair partner, and her daughter, put them in a shed in the middle of summer, and left town. They were found 3 weeks later, basically piles of putrid slime, maggots, like fill 10-gallon buckets full, and bloated body parts sloughing off as they tried to bag them. The murderer had a pilot's license and has never been caught. The decomp room smelled for months after that. A family friend was a first responder to a scene where a young woman committed suicide by running onto a busy highway at night. A semi-truck hit her, and essentially her body exploded. He described the scene of just picking up pieces scattered across the road and the shoulder. Edit. This got more attention than expected. The poor driver of the truck thought he'd hit a deer, and didn't know it was a person until he saw the tattered clothing on the road. This happened probably 12 years ago. The story stuck with me because of how cavalier he spoke about it. Sadly, this wasn't the worst call he'd ever had, and there were a few he refused to speak about. Not me personally, but my dad used to be an EMT firefighter. In the late 80s, he got a call about a horrid smell coming from the neighbor's house of the person calling. It knowing what it was, EMT, firefighter, and police were dispatched. They found the house was owned by a single old lady who died in her living room chair. Not too bad, right? Wrong. The chair was an old leather recliner, and as she was decomposing, she melted and fused with the leather chair. When the EMTs got there, they had to remove her from the house, and when they tried to pull her off, her back skin, arms and lower body separated from the rest of her body and remained attached to the chair. Decomposing flesh, blood, and organs fell out and all over the chair and floor. People were vomiting every 10 seconds and couldn't stand to be inside longer than a few minutes. My dad describes the smell and scene as the worst thing he has ever seen. Her body was so decomposed, she was basically liquid inside with a fragile shell. He had to leave and grab a full respirator from the fire truck, and even then it didn't do jack shit. The others took turns going in to retrieve the pieces so they can be disposed of. When they were finished, they burned the chair in the front yard. I work in disaster cleanup, including biohazard scenes. Sadly, it's only gotten worse since the Rona. Suicides have spiked. Murder is up. Old folks dying at home alone, and people not realizing for longer because they don't want to give grandma and grandpa the virus. You would think they'd still pick up the phone and call? They are all awful. From the man who murdered his mom with a weight, to the man who shot himself in the head then walked all around the house bleeding everywhere, to the man who shot himself, and we had to scrub blood off the baby bassinet, to the old man who died in a senior independent living facility who had no furniture and just a sleeping bag on the ground with garbage and feast stains everywhere. He wasn't found for some time. That one really bothered me a lot. Seeing someone who lived in those conditions and no one knew, or maybe didn't care, or they didn't realize he was gone until the odor got too bad. Gulp was first on scene to a pretty bad suicide. Midday, parking lot, guy smashes an entire handle of vodka sitting alone in his car. Proceeds to take out a box cutter and cut from his shoulder to his wrist, but real deep. Then proceeded to slash deep into his neck from side to side. I just happened to be patrolling through the area, and I saw a couple people running up to him. Right after he did it, he popped his car door open and slumped onto the ground. He was still alive, and I immediately called for an ambulance. I started tourniqueting his arm, but I knew it was just for show for the bystanders. The amount of blood on the ground meant that there was no saving him. He made a lot of sound, but nothing after a few seconds. He officially coded in the back of the ambulance. Only other bad one that stuck with me was showing up second to a body that was pulled out of the river after 3 days. Guy was a bridge jumper and washed up on the shore with his eyes eaten out and completely bloated. I had to sit next to the body for hours out in the summer heat, waiting for the medical examiner. Bonus edit. Hot July. There's a car parked on the backside of a Walmart tucked in the corner of the lot. Young male 20 years old died inside the car. He pretty much baked inside for about 4 days before anyone though to check on the vehicle. I never got the story on how exactly he died, but I do remember he wasn't from the area. He was ID'd, and his parents from a few states over were contacted. On the day his parents came, I was tasked with escorting them to the medical examiner's office. The me unzipped the bag in front of them, and even in that cold room, the pungent smell slammed me. The mother covered her face with both hands and immediately started crying. Then I watched in disbelief as she leaned in and kissed his face. I can never imagine the horror of having to ID your child, but the image of her kissing that decayed body will never leave my mind. My ex was a funeral director. The two that stick out, Semi, who turned in front of a crotch rocket. He said even with the helmet on, the guy's head just exploded. He said you try to pick up the big parts, but you are mostly shoveling goo into garbage bags. Not a murder, but the old man who had a heart attack outside by the campfire, alone. No one checked on him for so long. By time they found him, everything but his one foot was completely burned up. Fun bonus story. He had keys to the cemetery and would take me to the crematorium at night. The tour was weird. He showed me a bucket full of the metal parts left after a cremation, hip, knee replacements, etc., and he made me stand to the side while he opened the oven to see if they were done. And you don't want to see this, he just opened it a couple inches, was like, nope, needs more time. Like he was checking a fucking pizza. He was fucking weird. Obligatory not a cleanup pro, but working at a county animal shelter meant we got the roadkill remains. We were required to hold them in our facility's body freezer for a certain number of days in case someone came in looking for a pet matching the description. This, of course, meant you had to try and come up with identifying information from whatever was left of the animal. Sometimes it was easy, they were just a bit bloodied or twisted, but other times you had to double glove, put on the apron, and start folding the bits around to try and tell what color it used to be. The worst part was when someone came in looking for a pet that matched a DOA description. Whoever happened to answer the call from the front desk had to go get it out of the freezer and try to arrange it in such a way that the person could come identify it without passing out or vomiting. We were legit trained to handle if someone passed out or puked. Luckily, it never happened to me, but we had a chair and a stretcher just in case. The hardest part was when people tried to act all tough like it was no big deal, but then absolutely melting down. One in particular really haunts me. Pretty typical case of cat v car, leg and rib bones sticking out. So much blood we had to towel it down to check for markings. Eyeballs hanging out and one of them is deflated and shriveled. Guts hanging out the anus. Just a mess. Lo and behold, the poor thing had a collar and microchip. I ended up being the one to respond when the owner arrived and they explained the situation. Big, muscly dude. wearing a Marine Corps t-shirt, tats up and down his arms. He's shaking like a leaf and trying to hide it when I come up to get him and take him back. I had this spiel I used to give about how we do this just to be sure, and sometimes it's hard to see animals like this, and just let me know if he needs to step out for a second. He tells me point blank that he's a veteran. He's seen guys get shot. He can handle it. We go into the room where I have the half-frozen cat corpse under a towel, the bloody collar on top of it. He picks up the collar without a word, and I can see in his eyes that he knows. I ask if he wants to head back up front now, and he says he has to be sure. So I pull the towel back carefully to expose just the top half, but the poor thing was in bad shape. The good side is facing up, but its jaw is still shattered and hanging funny. The one eye is bulging out and filled with blood like a demented snow globe. Half the tongue is missing. There's a clear depression on the chest from the tires. One leg is twisted around like a dang Twizzler. The guy just stares. After a few seconds, he just turns for the door, stops halfway there, looks back, and takes a knee like someone hit him in the gut. All he says is, "I saw my guys get shot." Why a cat? It's just a cat, man. It's just a cat. The whole time he's clutching the bloody collar to his chest. It turned out, per the girls up front who had talked to him at first, that it was the cat his therapist had recommended he get for his PTSD. Her name had been Hope. And this is the end of today's video. I hope you liked it, and don't forget to comment an anecdote or experience similar to the topic of the video. Leave your like, share if you like the video, and lastly, don't forget to activate the little bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Bye-bye.